Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay.
Recording.
Mhm.
Okay. Hi guys. So we are doing the clock drawing test for our neuro presentation, the CDT. I'm Jess. That's Sarah. And we were supposed to present on the 21st of April, but now we're doing it this way instead. So Sarah's going to share her screen and we will tell you all about it.
Okay, so we are going to go through our slideshow. It's a pretty short slideshow. Going to start with a quick intro. What is the clock drawing test? We looked during our paper into a little bit of the history of the clock drawing test, and it's a test that is actually like pretty old. They found the first like written recording of it in 1915. So initially it was used in testing for aphasia and constructional apraxia. And then eventually in the 1980s, it became a cognitive screen. And so that is what it's commonly used for today. But you'll see throughout the presentation that there's kind of a lot of uses for it. And it's really quick, and it's something that will likely, for those of us that end up working with adults, it could be something that is really useful for us in the future. So what is it? It is a test. It's used to screen for cognitive, perceptual, and psychological impairments. It has been found to have strong psychometric properties. So 85% sensitivity and 85% specificity. It also has a really high test retest reliability, as well as predictive value. So according to the Shirley,
And it has a high inter-rater.
Oh yes, and the inter-rater too.
Sorry.
Thanks. Okay, so for the administration, it's pretty easy. You don't need any special training. There's different ways to administer it. On one of them, the patient is asked to draw the whole clock face with its numbers. On other versions, you might see a circle presented to them so that they have a little bit of a head start. And then generally, the patient or the person taking the test is given a time. Historically, the time has been 10 after 11. And they're asked to mark that time with the appropriate length of the clock hands. So yeah, depending on the error and the part of the brain, Jess is going to get into like what errors might look like. And yeah.
So this is a really neat image that I found, and I wasn't really able to find exactly like what each of the abnormal patterns meant, but I think we can kind of do some guesstimating. The top are all examples of normal patterns. So you can see even if the numbers don't fully complete the circle, it's still considered normal. But then on the bottom, you can see a lot of like really significant errors. So one that I think, and again, I didn't find a complete accurate answer, but one that I was thinking was that neglect would be the third one from the left on the bottom, third one from the left. So the one where it's got the numbers that kind of go halfway. That looks like it might be neglect to me because it's not really seeing that other side. One important thing to note really quick too on here is that this is not using the clock hands. So I think depending on what version you're administering or what you see when you ask for the numbers, you might just not even need the clock hands, or you might choose not to test those.
Yeah, and this is also sort of a few of the abnormal patterns that you can see. There's a huge variety of things that ways that people can mess this up. Like there can be motor deficits where they're just kind of like writing in one little corner of it. And like Jess said, the neglect. So there's all kinds of ways. I read one study where one of the patients, their clock, their watch actually had the day of the week next to the number. So when they wrote all of the numbers out in the correct position, they also wrote the days of the week. So yeah, it's a really interesting way to think about the way the brain, oh, this is my slide too. So, okay. it's a quick test, and that is probably one of the, other than like the great psychometric properties of it, like it takes 2 minutes to administer. You can provide this test and have the answer almost immediately. You don't need training. It's free. You often see it in primary care and memory care, especially because it's used for generally moderate to severe dementia and Alzheimer's, but also stroke. And then, as you can see there on the slide, there have been studies that test for schizophrenia, Huntington's disease, and then also depression, but that's kind of something that we're going to talk about, I think, a little bit later too. And, oh, actually, we're going to talk about it right now. If you look at the bottom where it says the factors that might impact the performance, one of them is presence of depression, education, hemiparesis, etc.
Okay, so now we're going to look at what might lead to an abnormal CDT and those associated brain areas. So I found some really cool studies. Sarah found one that was awesome. It was really good about just general abnormal results and what we might see as associated brain damage area. And then I found a really neat one about visual neglect specifically that I really liked, because that's something that, for me, it really interests me, and it's something that we've talked a little bit about in class, so I thought we might as well just jump right into it. So starting with general abnormal results, they're most commonly associated with damage to the parietal lobe of the brain, and it's really common to see when you're testing the clock, visuospatial errors are really common and predominant with right hemisphere damage. And then time setting errors are common and predominant with the left hemisphere damage, which I think is really interesting. And it goes back to our lecture that we had on lateralization and how each side of the brain does different things. And then over to visual neglect, it's really interesting to me because it's associated with damage in a variety of locations. Most commonly, visual neglect is seen actually with damage to the territory of the right middle cerebral artery, which again, I think is really, really interesting because we're talking about visual neglect. So damage to that area doesn't necessarily hit the occipital lobe too hard, but a little bit, obviously. Less commonly seen, but still seen, is damage to the thalamus and damage to the superficial posterior cerebral artery. Again, they're much less commonly seen, but it's just super interesting how damage to all these different areas of the brain can still contribute to visual neglect. And then we see that through the CDT. And then my favorite quote that I saw in one of the articles is that not only is the CDT a really good screening tool for things like memory problems, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc., but it's really cool and useful as an index of focal brain dysfunction to help us figure out where that dysfunction is. And I'm also just realizing that I put 2 ands in that sentence, so that is my bad, and I apologize. You can go to the next slide, Sarah.
Okay. Okay. Oh, those are our references. Here's all of our references. Jess, do you have anything else?
Like, we had the ADL and IADLs on that last slide.
Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. Oh, we have another slide. Perfect. Yay.
Yeah. So I can jump in and talk about neglect, because that's the one that I was looking at mostly. And then if you wanted to talk about Alzheimer's, that would be perfect.
Cool.
It's up to you. I really like this clip art that I found because it's a guy just shaving one side of his face, which I think is perfect for this, because with neglect, there are many different types of neglect. I was just talking about visual neglect, but there's also like sensory neglect, and then there's like neglect that just is all encompassing. But you're going to see a lot of difficulty with grooming, bathing, and eating, among other things. So an example, again, going back to that clip art, a man might shave only one side of his face that he's aware of. And then a really interesting thing that we found is that a person might experience pocketing on that neglected side while they're eating. So that's definitely something to think about and be aware of as well.
Yeah, and so just kind of going off of the pocketing thing, when you think about like Alzheimer's and dementia and just like cognitive impairments in general, safety is kind of the big issue. If people are pocketing food, that's a choking hazard. They could die. So screening is key. This test, I think we didn't really mention it earlier, and I'm just going to like stick it in there. The clock drawing test is often administered with the mini mental state exam, and not on its own. So it's kind of like a tool that is like, it's not the end all be all, it's just sort of an assist. But yeah, with the Alzheimer's and the dementia, all of the IADL and ADL impacts that Jess was talking about, except for like only shaving one side of your face, but all of those safety issues are can be affected in a person that's having these kinds of impairments. And it's also important to note that I can't remember if we already mentioned it, but this is a tool that is used for moderate to severe cognitive impairment, and it's not really great. They're not going to use this test on somebody that like might have mild dementia. It's like somebody that's already in the throes of this disease. So yeah, I think that's our presentation. It's been about 11 minutes. So thank you. I'm going to stop the screen share. Here we are. And yeah, miss you guys.
If you have any questions too, feel free to connect with us. We have a very long, very dense paper about it, so I'm sure we could probably answer some of them. Hopefully, maybe.
You can read it. Okay, bye.
Yeah. Bye, guys.